Welcome, everybody, to Heart of the Matter. I'm Elizabeth Vargas, your host, and I'm so happy you're joining us. It is the start of school. Oh my gosh, chaos. More chaos than usual this year for very obvious reasons. Schools are bracing for mental health crises after more than a year of remote or hybrid learning. We've got the Delta variant raging. We've got the debate over mask requirements raging. We've got debate over vaccines and critical race theory raging. One school superintendent said, I read in the newspaper recently, it's like being in the eye of the storm. And we know this is true. Half of all parents report that their kids' mental health has suffered dramatically during this pandemic. And researchers have found higher rates of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress in teenagers and young adults more than in any other age group in this country. And this age group, 18 to 24, is more likely to self-medicate their anxiety and their depression with drugs and alcohol. My guest today really has made it his life's mission to try and connect to this particular age group. Chris Herren, he was one of my first guests on this podcast, and we had him back because it is the start of the school year. And he's traveling the country, has been doing so for years now, talking to teenagers and really connecting with them. And you can see a lot of these speeches he gives to these kids in the documentary, The First Day. And in it, take a listen to this clip where he talks about what it's like to struggle with mental health issues, and even after many, many years in recovery.
I've been sober for almost 9 years. There has not been one day I woke up wanting to smoke a drink, take a pill, or shoot dope, except the days I just don't feel good being me. It's been that from day one. The battle's always been right here. Drugs and alcohol came second. Not being me. It always came first.
Not being me, it always came first. That's pretty powerful. And for whatever reason, many, many of these kids and teenagers that he speaks to around the country really relate to that. Chris is a former NBA player, a former heroin addict with now many, many years of sobriety under his belt. He runs wellness centers, helping other young adults and older adults find sobriety and life in recovery. I thought it would be really important as we start this school year and our focus is on our kids, to talk to Chris about what we can do to help them, what he's seeing out there as he travels the country, and how we can best prepare our kids to meet the upcoming year. Chris Herren, welcome back to Heart of the Matter.
It's great to be back. Thanks for having me.
It's so nice to have you. You are our very first guests on our podcast. So you were so fantastic. We decided to have you back. How's that? No pressure. You've got to be like stupendously amazing today.
Well, that's good to hear. But I'm excited. I'm grateful to be back.
Yeah. Before we start talking, I wanted to get your take as a former professional basketball player on Simone Biles and her very public, obviously, discussion about mental health, the impact it had on her stint at the Olympics, and what that's done in terms of changing, the parameters about how we speak about mental health and how athletes at the very top of their game may be physically fantastic and psychologically not.
I think the psychological part is probably the biggest challenge.
Right.
We're all pretty gifted when we get to that level. The psychological aspect of it is the most challenging point, whether it's confidence or self-doubt, self-esteem. But she spoke loudly, and something that I'm proud of as a person in recovery, who over the last 10 years has worked really hard to kind of change the conversation and the stigma.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that she felt comfortable enough to announce on the biggest stage that she's not doing well, I think is a testament to her and to everyone who's worked so hard at kind of changing the stigma around this.
You work extensively in the field of recovery, especially with kids, young adults, adolescents. You speak constantly all over the country to kids about this issue. What impact do you think Simone Biles coming out and talking about this? She's 24, she's young, she's in that age group. What do you think? What impact do you think that'll have?
You know, I think it kind of, it disarms a lot of people from saying like, suck it up, like,
right.
You know, get through it, suck it up. You know, the fact that she walked away from the Olympics. I mean,
right.
it's just, you know, and I have so much respect for those sports. You know, it's every 4 years,
right.
You know, and it's not like an NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball. There's a game tomorrow.
Right.
You know, I mean, this is her World Series. This is her Super Bowl, and it only comes every 4 years. And you know, the fact that she said, I'm not feeling well enough. You know, it's just is extremely brave. So I'm proud of the moment that she shared with everyone, and you know, I'm proud of her as a young woman who stood up for herself and let everybody know that, you know, as successful, as talented as she is, you know, she needed to step back.
The heroic act that she committed here was that what you just said, as successful and as talented as she is, she's the best gymnast ever in the history of the sport, according to every expert. And that she would step back from, I mean, let's be honest, gymnastics isn't like basketball where you get to go to the NBA and, you know, or all the other European leagues or all the different leagues and different ways to continue to play and compete and earn a great living. I mean, gymnastics, that's it. You know, after you retire from gymnastics, there is no professional gymnastics, you know, league, that sort of thing. And the fact that she would stand up and say, I need to take care of myself. At a time when we know statistically, and we're going to get to this in a second, there are so many people who are suffering with anxiety, with depression, and not just in this country, in the world, as a result of the pandemic. To stand up for yourself and say, I can't do this right now. It's dangerous for me to do this. I need to take care of myself is a huge thing. And,
you know, I think she stood up for so many others. You know, I think that's the beauty of it. You know, I don't think she'll ever realize the ripple effect that, you know, that she's going to have in people's lives where, you know, they're going to intervene earlier. You know, they're not going to push themselves to the limit and to the breaking point. That, you know, they're going to respect how they feel and they're going to take a step back and make sure they feel better. You know, this was her opportunity to kind of cash in. You know, I mean, it really is. It's the Olympics.
She could have gone home with 6 golds and been, you know, on the covers of all the Wheaties boxes yet again. And
absolutely. And she didn't. And it just speaks volumes. And I think it's going to save a lot of people's lives. I think it's going to help families and I think the ripple effect is going to be tremendous. And just one more person speaking up and breaking down the stigma and making people comfortable to speak out, to say it out loud. I mean, it's gonna go on for a long time, that the positive influence that will have.
We know that of any demographic, that adolescents 18 to 24, young adults 18 to 24 are the most impacted. Why do you think we've seen in that particular demographic the highest jump in substance use disorder during the pandemic of any other? You mentioned the moms and the dads and the middle-aged people. I mean, everybody's struggling. Let's be honest. We do know statistically from all the evidence and research that everybody is dealing with increased levels of anxiety and depression. Why is the 18 to 24-year-old group seeing the highest level of substance use disorder to deal with that?
You know, I think they lost structure in their life. And you know, they whether like my daughter, she's a freshman at Providence College and she's never sat in a classroom yet. She's going into her sophomore year. She's never been in class.
Yeah.
So just losing that contact, that connection with people and meeting new people and just, not having the opportunity to get out and express yourself and lean on others. So, and let's be honest, right? I think 18 to 24, the parents have eyes on them now. They're home and it's glaring. So that's what happens. That's what we get. I get the calls from parents who say, I've been with my son for a year now and I had no idea how much he struggled. And, if it wasn't for the pandemic, that child would be away at college. Mm-hmm. So I think that also plays a part in it.
We already knew even before the pandemic, there was a cover story on Time magazine saying the kids are not okay, basically talking about increased rates of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation among young adults and teenagers. And then you had the pandemic and you completely stripped this generation from structure that they're used to, a routine of going to school, doing homework, going to after school sports, that sort of thing. Increased, exponentially the isolation. You're not allowed to go hang out with your friends. You can't go there. You can't go there. Everything is closed. What is it about this particular group of people in this age group? In other words, there was already lots of warning lights flashing that we need to do something to help our adolescents. Tell me obviously the impact of the pandemic layered on top of that has led to a huge crisis. What can we as parents, as society, as you yourself in recovery and running wellness centers and recovery centers, what can we do to help our kids?
Well, I think, it's moments like Simone Biles shared. It's glaring. People are talking about it. Kids are not afraid to share that they're struggling. Unfortunately, there's nothing there to catch them, and we're not equipping our children with the tools and some of the structure around mental health and education. So, kids are waking up at 18, 22, 24 years old, and they just don't know where to turn. Mm-hmm. And so sadly, people are talking about it. It's great that people are talking about it, but where's the support, once they reach out for help? And that's where we have to get better. You
go around the country speaking to auditorium and gymnasiums full of teenagers about your own story, about how, from the outside looking in, you were the kid in high school who had it all. You were the star basketball player, famous in the newspapers already as a teenager, still in high school for your basketball skills and prowess on the court. You were, handsome, you had it all going for you. And yet you were the kid who had to drink a lot of alcohol in order to just walk in the door of that party.
No father wants his little boy to look up at him and say, hey, guess what, Dad? I walk around this house like I'm the man. But truth be told, I can't even sit amongst my friends on a Friday night and just be myself. I don't even have the confidence. So it makes me feel a little better about myself when I walk into basements with a buzz on. It allows me to do things I normally wouldn't. Parents don't want to hear that, so they don't ask it. See, I think parents hover over you, academically apply pressure to you, athletically, but forget you socially. When we need a coach, a teacher the most, we're all by ourselves in a basement and have no idea what to do with it.
Talk a little bit about what you tell these kids about that hidden anxiety and that anybody can have it, even the people who look like from the outside looking in, they've got it all.
Yeah, for me, and I've changed my presentation over the years, right? Because I think it's really hard to present my drug addiction and where it took me to a 14 and 15-year-old. It's hard for them to identify, but so me changing my presentation and talking about the first day and the feelings behind it and where I was at when and how I felt, the first time I drank alcohol or walked into my first high school party, and the lack of self-esteem and self-worth and fear, that's what they can relate to, and it's very, that's why the presentation, I feel, has impacted so many, because it speaks to them and the current situation that they're in. I tell them, I scored thousands of points in high school. I was ranked in the top 20 players in the country, and a guy was writing a book about me, and my dad was a politician, and we owned a few homes, and I was in the newspaper every day. But I couldn't hang out with 10 kids I've known my whole life without getting drunk. And that's tragic, and it's sad. And I think, my mom, who passed away from cancer at a very young age, I think as a parent, people would look at my mom and dad and say, wow, like, you guys did a good job. Like, your son's really driven and successful. And, but there was a whole missing piece and that I didn't have, and I wasn't healthy. And, I tell, when I go and speak to colleges and college football teams and basketball teams, and, I tell them to be a pro at being themselves, like, be a pro at being you. Like, that's so special. And, people don't seek that, they think that it's just going to happen. And it takes a lot of work to be comfortable with the person you look at in the mirror and the person you walk around as every day. And that's a challenge in my life today in recovery. I probably struggle with that more than I struggle with the urge of drinking alcohol.
You struggle with what? Looking at
just
what?
Mental, your mental health and your self-worth and your self-esteem. Those are all for me, the character defects that I've had that bring me back to the drugs and alcohol. So, unfortunately, parents, when they catch their kids drinking, for the first time, it's who were you with? Where were you? What friends? How much did you do? And they don't ask them why. They never ask why. And, that's the thing with me and my children. I'm fortunate. My son and my daughter, 22 and 19, they've never drank. My 12-year-old, if I catch him, we're going to talk about why. And I think that's the most important piece that's missing.
What was the answer to the why for you?
Oh, gosh.
When you described that, that kid who's in the newspaper every day, who's got somebody already writing a book about him, with parents who love him and are successful, and there's no economic insecurity, there's no food insecurity, you're not worrying about, any of that stuff. So why did you have to get drunk before you even walked into a party with your friends?
I wasn't, my father's alcoholism was kind of like the hidden, that was like the giant, that we were keeping in the house.
The elephant in the room.
Big time. And, that as a child and not knowing what parent was going to walk through the door that night, is it, open shirt, crooked tie, loose tie, no sport coat, all those signs that you grow up and you're aware of. That's not easy. And my father's alcoholism had great impact, and it still does. My dad's very sick, and I wish I could give him a little bit of what I have today. And his alcoholism has impacted us for as long as I can remember. So I think that played a part in it. I think obviously as I grew up and became more aware of my basketball ability, that the pressure and the stress that was attached to that was extremely difficult for me to manage. And again, I didn't have, Simone Biles to say, I need to step away for a couple of weeks. I need to
and talk to somebody and figure this out and get my head in the right space.
But when you think about it, I mean, I travel all across the country, and not just high schools and not middle schools, but with big time college athletics. And you walk in and they give you a tour, and everything is focused on the physical, right? It's here's the weight room, here's the study hall, here's the court, here's the field, but very little work done internally. And I think as we get better at this, I think parents, educators, I think we have to start challenging our kids' social and emotional health.
When you were playing for the Boston Celtics, you tell a story, a searing story about going outside the arena to score some drugs like 5 minutes before tip-off, and you were supposed to be on the court at tip-off because you needed the drugs to play. Like you told that story when you were first on the podcast, and I was so amazed, not only that, first of all, that you were able to play and compete at the level you did with the addiction that you were also suffering from, but that nobody else noticed. Like, didn't somebody say, hey, Chris, where are you going 5 minutes before tip off? Didn't they notice that you were having withdrawal from the opiates before? And then all of a sudden you weren't, because you disappeared 5 minutes before tip off.
In 1999, it wasn't in the headlines, right? Opioids was really, I remember when I overdosed for the first time in 2004, people were just horrified. And it'd been, it was not on the front page of newspapers, that we're in the middle of an opioid crisis like we are today. So people really weren't paying much attention to it. I had just, OxyContin, it just grabbed a hold of me, and, my tolerance increased, and 1,600 milligrams a day, and, the money, and I couldn't play without it. And I was gonna figure out a way to deflect, and take the attention that possibly was on me and create something different. So they would get away from it. I don't want to sound where I'm placing blame, but I wasn't a key figure, in the NBA. I wasn't one of the main guys. So, I was a guy that played sparingly, sat on the bench, backed people up. So I was expendable, and the average career for guys like me, I believe, is like 3 years in the NBA. So, not that they didn't care, they didn't notice. I wasn't in their focus. But people who suffer from addiction or alcoholism, can really identify with that level of desperation and, running out to get it, because you couldn't without it. And, that's something that, I've shared on purpose because it was a very low moment in my life.
Yeah.
But allowing people to identify with it.
We are doing this as school starts up yet again. We know that drug overdoses in this country are up 30% in the last year, largely driven by the pandemic. We know that 18 to 24-year-olds are the segment of the population suffering most when it comes to self-medicating through anxiety and depression. It's a very uncertain year. We have the CDC saying, kids should be wearing masks all the time in school. We have local and state governments fighting that. The rules are disparate. It's stressful. Parents are outraged and angry about whatever set of rules might be there. What in your mind is ringing alarm bells about mental health in our kids as they head back into the classrooms this fall, after the last year they've had, in the middle of this political, hysterical, confrontational cauldron, you know, with the adults behaving badly, to be honest. Nobody's talking about this in a respectful way. Like, I respect your, you know, your family. You might have a vulnerable family member or children too young to be vaccinated and, you know, want people to wear masks, and you feel it's a violation of your, you know, civil rights. I don't know. It's a tough time to be a human being right now on this planet.
It is. I mean, I jumped out of the car today in DC to fly home, you know, and I forgot my mask, and I was like in a panic. How am I going to get in the airport without a mask? And I had to borrow one from someone who was coming in. But, you know, shame on our educators. Shame on, you know, the people in this country that have the opportunity to have our children captive, and hopefully, you know, there are school districts and states and counties that are preparing for, you know, what this is going to look like for our children, and the adjustment of coming back into the classroom, the adjustment of wearing a mask all day long, the adjustment of, you know, being quarantined for 14 days. I mean, my son was quarantined 5 or 6 times in college last year. And, you know, like, you're asking a 20-year-old kid to be locked in his room for 14 days, 5 different times. Something's going to go wrong.
Yeah, my nephew went to UC Boulder and spent most of his freshman year doing Zoom classes in his dorm room.
Right.
I mean, it's these kids, it's been very tough.
Yes, extremely tough. And I found myself as a parent flying out on a Friday and taking the red eye home Sunday, you know, just because I was so concerned about, you know, how he was adjusting to this. And, you know, but there's a lot of people that don't have a parent on a red eye or can jump out and support them. You know, there's a lot of kids doing this by themselves. And like you said, there's a lot of homes that are just out of whack, off balance. You know, parents are struggling, children are struggling. And, you know, hopefully that age group, you know, you say 18 to 24, you know, I'm focused too on, you know, the elementary, the middle school, the high school kids who have to make this adjustment and come back.
Well, because by the way, most substance use begins in middle school. It doesn't start 18 to 24. It starts much earlier. Yours did.
Yeah, mine did. And most, you know, I mean, I think when we identify the first day, you know, most of us are starting at that, you know, the young teenage years. And, you know, I think they're going to have their hands full. And when you look at it, right? So I speak at a lot of schools where, you know, it's like 800 students, 600 students per guidance counselor. Come on. You know, like you're putting 600 children on one guidance counselor. And that's a shame. It shows you how much we've invested in our children's, you know, mental health. And it's unfortunate. So, you know, I'm sure there's schools that will prepare. I'm sure there's schools that won't. And hopefully, if we continue to talk about this, we'll continue to put the pressure on the people in the right place that are going to have to recognize this and put the necessary structure in place to support our children.
You have done such a remarkable job connecting with the kids that you go all around the country to talk to. And by the way, I recommend that everybody watch the documentary First Day. That shows a lot of Chris speaking to these kids and really shows how the powerful impact your words have on those kids. But if you were, what are the 3 things you would tell any high school kid right now, middle school kid, high school kid, college age kid, getting ready to go back in a year that has been incredibly stressful and that unbelievably continues to be very stressful? What would you tell them about handling the anxiety, the depression, the loneliness, the loss of structure, all of that?
I think, you know, just like I tell people, you know, in my wellness center, I think everyone deserves, you know, a starting 5. Everyone deserves to surround themselves with 4 other people in their life that's going to lift them when they can't lift themselves, that are going to show up when you're struggling to show up.
How do you find that starting 5?
And that's what I would say. I would say to kids, find the people in your life who are supportive, who are non-judgmental. Find someone in your school who who you can trust and you can count on. And don't be afraid to be courageous, right? Do not be afraid, to be courageous and speak up and talk about struggle. Mm-hmm. I think, in our struggle, there's a lot of strength, and I can identify with that. But again, the way our system is set up, our school system is set up, the education of our children from kindergarten to senior year, there's so little focus around creating, a healthy mind and a healthy body, and, challenging our children socially and emotionally. And, they're going to have to pivot, going into this year. And hopefully the kids, hopefully they have someone in their life that they can trust and they can talk to.
I'm struck by how many kids get very emotional when you speak to them in these big groups. And, there's obviously the handful that where it resonates, like they're a child in crisis, and you can see them, dissolve into tears. But there's also a lot of people, a lot of kids in that audience who get very emotional when you talk about recognizing another kid's struggle. When you talk about empathizing with another kid who might look different or act different, when you talk about what it's like for them, and for just a second, walk in their shoes and think about how your actions impact them.
I think, and that's why I lead off my presentations with talking about self-harm.
Yeah.
I think, that's something that kids, when I first started speaking 10 years ago, people were afraid to talk about that. And now it seems
cutting themselves
self-harm. I lead with that because I think a lot of kids see me, we got a former NBA basketball player coming in. He's just here to talk to the jocks, to the athletes. And when I lead with that, I see a lot of kids sit up and say, wait a second, this assembly is kind of about me, and now he's talking about something that I can relate to. And oftentimes I walk into schools and it's the mom or dad that kids are crying over, the older brother or sister, that they're emotional about. Or like you said, a friend who they know who's struggling and they don't know how to address it. Kids, we've created this, secrecy and stigma around mental health and addiction, where if a child hears a friend talking about how sad they are, how depressed they are, they're afraid to go tell someone, they're going to keep the secret for them. So, those presentations, we receive so much feedback on what that presentation spoke to. And oftentimes they're relating to a friend, they're relating to a family member, or a brother or sister who's struggling.
Finally, what would you tell the parents? What can we as parents do, or what should we not do? What can we say, or what should we not say?
Yeah, I think parents need to have the hard conversations early. I think parents have, there's a lot of parents that sit back and just hope and pray nothing goes wrong. Mm-hmm. Instead of talking about what could possibly go wrong. And that's why I say, ask them why. Who cares with who, how much, where it happened. Talk about why.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Talk about why it's happening. Talk about challenge their self-esteem, challenge their self-worth. You can bring them home after school and check their emails for homework and what's their GPA and how they're doing on their SATs. But parents don't look at their kids and say, how's your self-esteem? How are you feeling? What do you see when you look in the mirror? And that's those are the tough conversations that parents often shy away from. And parents kind of have hijacked weekends, right? They disappear on Fridays after a long, hard week, and they forget when their kids need them the most. on a Saturday night when their daughter doesn't feel pretty enough, good enough, healthy enough, mom and dad need to be there to lift her or him. So, I would continue to challenge and ask why and talk about, have the tough conversations with them.
It's going to be an interesting year.
It is.
And I only hope that we can somehow turn the tide on these frightening statistics when it comes to anxiety and depression and substance use disorder and people trying to self-medicate. Gosh, I tell my kids all the time, you drink over a problem, you get sober, the problem's still there, but now you're hungover. It's just like, it doesn't help.
Not going away. Yeah, it's not going away. And I think we've done a good job. I think we're working towards that. I think, as I said in the intro, in the beginning, like whoever's worked, on mental health and breaking the stigma, Simone Biles stood up and was comfortable to stand up because of you. And, and because of your bravery and your work. And, that's special. And it shows how far we've come, and there's still a lot of work to do, but it shows how far we've come. And I'm proud to be part of it. And I think we continue to talk about it and have conversations like this. And, I'll be in Texas this coming week and traveling all over the country in front of children. And I'll continue to drive that point home that, their self-esteem, their self-worth, their mental health is just as important as anything that they're going to deal with in their childhood.
Chris Herren, thank you so much for all your work you do through your speaking, through your wellness center, through your foundation, everything.
Thank you,
it's
Elizabeth.
an important message, and you're targeting a segment of our population that is extremely vulnerable right now.
It's great to see you, and thank you for having me.
Great to see you. Thank you
All right.
so much.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening today to Heart of the Matter. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website at drugfree.org/podcast. And as a reminder, if you need help with a loved one who is struggling with substance use, you can text 55753 or visit drugfree.org. We'll talk to you soon.